ahead.
Our mission, Helping Parents Heal, is a nonprofit organization dedicated to assisting bereaved parents. Through support and resources offered, we aspire to help individuals become shining light parents, meaning a shift from a state of emotional heaviness to one of hopefulness and greater peace of mind. Helping Parents Heal goes a step beyond other groups by allowing the open discussion of spiritual experiences and afterlife evidence in a non-dogmatic way. Helping Parents Heal affiliate groups welcome everyone, regardless of religious or non-religious background, and encourage open dialogue. Attendance at all Helping Parents Heal meetings is voluntary. All discussions that take place at affiliate-led meetings are confidential. We hope that participants will learn from and share with each other. Zoom meetings run by leadership are not confidential. These meetings typically feature guest presenters and are posted on YouTube so that affiliate members worldwide can watch and benefit. Neither type of Helping Parents Heal meeting is designed to replace traditional therapy or spiritual counseling. Helping Parents Heal offers a wide variety of speakers, allowing parents to learn about many possible ways to heal. This includes presenters covering progressive topics such as afterlife evidence and connecting with our children who have passed. The views expressed by our guest speakers may or may not reflect the opinions of Helping Parents Heal leaders and members, so we ask that you take from their presentations whatever may benefit you personally. Welcome, everyone. Welcome, and we're so glad that you're here with us this evening.
We're thrilled to have Dr. Lenore Matthew with us. And again, thank you, Jacob, for introducing us. I'm going to read her bio, and I am just so fascinated by her life and by what's happened to her in the last few years. And I'm sure that you all will be by the end of the meeting as well. Dr. Lenore Matthew holds a PhD and Master of Social Work with expertise in research, evaluation, and evidence-based practice, as well as grief and trauma. She is also a trained evidential medium and a young widow by suicide loss. Her ability of mediumship opened up when her husband Bruno unexpectedly passed in 2020. After her mediumistic awakening, she began formally training in mediumship development with Bruno as her main guide. Previously, Dr. Matthew worked as a research and evaluation specialist with international humanitarian organizations, including the United Nations. In her work today, she blends her background as a researcher and social worker with her mediumship ability. Her mission is to normalize mediumship and other intuitive mind, body, spirit healing modalities and demonstrate their clinical viability as transformative healing tools, especially for people moving through trauma, loss, and grief. Dr. Matthew publishes frequently on grief, trauma, mediumship, and intuitive healing. Her work has been featured by the National Alliance on Mental Illness, the Mighty Mental Health Community, and the Mental Health America Hawaii. She holds a PhD and Master of Social Work from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. And you can find out more about her and her work at www.drlenorematthew.com. And without further ado, please join me in welcoming the beautiful Dr. Lenore Matthew. Welcome, Dr. Lenore.
There we are, unmuted. Hello, thank you so much for that, Elizabeth. Thank you, Irene, so much for the introduction. I recognize some faces in here. This is so exciting. And of course, there are new faces as well. So thank you so much for your energy. I could already feel so before we jumped on. There was just this feeling of joy and elation and happiness all around me before I come to any event, especially working with spirit, but in any capacity working in mental wellness, mental health. I ground and I just say some sort of an invocation to my spirit team, to my late husband, Bruno, on the other side, who's still my main guide. And as I was sitting down, I was just surrounded by this cloud of joy. It was so strong that I had to message a colleague of mine who's also a medium and a mental health practitioner. And I was like, I don't think I've ever felt this before working with spirit. And just absolutely covered in goosebumps right now as I say so. And it makes a lot of sense that that would be, because there's no other emotion that children encapsulate as strong as joy and elation. And so I just invited everyone close that I was feeling in almost this like swirling wall and just said, come be with us and let's enjoy what we can this evening in sharing, in chatting, and discussing, in holding space, in asking questions, and perhaps even forming some new relationships and contacts. So as Elizabeth so beautifully introduced, I'm a doctor of social work. My background is in research and in policy and programmatic evaluation. So I love very nerdy things. I love data sets. I love quantitative evaluation techniques. I love qualitative research, which is talking to people and hearing people's stories. I especially love the latter. I am a Libra and an empath through and through. I love connecting with people. And that's always been a part of the research that I've done for quite a long time, that even preceded the work that I do now. This path of mediumship opened up for me, and working with the spirit world opened up by very traumatic means with the passing of my husband in 2020. So Bruno was the love of my life. In many ways, he still is the love of my life. He will always be my soulmate. We were together for 13 years when he was in the physical, and we still very much have an active relationship with him on the other side. Of course, with grief and with healing and with aging. I was in my mid-30s when he passed. I'm 40 in 2 weeks, which I can't believe, but I'm celebrating that. That's exciting as well. Life shifts and changes, and he shifts and changes on the other side. And it's a beautiful shift and change, and that we still work together. It's still very much a symbiotic, loving relationship. So today I'm going to keep myself and hold myself to a time frame, because I want to make sure that there's ample time for Q&A at the end if there are any questions at all. But I'll talk to you a little bit about my story and how my connection to Bruno and my other loved ones on the other side opened up when he crossed in 2020, how I developed what opened up after he crossed, deciding to, and I say deciding because it very much was a conscious decision, but I decided to train in mediumship, and then how it led me back full circle to the work that I do now, which is practice and research, which is what I was doing before. So I'll kind of hold that there. And then I will also share some results from one of my studies that I'm doing now. I just presented the study. It's actually the title of it here. It's Unexpected Mediumship Awakenings After the Loss of a Loved One and Implications for Mental Health Practice. So I just presented this study a month ago. It feels like eons ago, but it's just a month. Last month in Norway at the International Parapsychological Association Conference. And parapsychology is the intersection between the psychological sciences and the paranormal, or as I like to say, the spirit world. So I interviewed 31 people from across the world that had an experience like I had. And really interesting implications for grief, for joy, for light, and for moving into life that's not after loss, but is life kind of opened up by way of a transition to the other side, right? And so it's a very complex experience, as we all know, who those of us who are here in this room. But as the research is showing, and for me, it validated an experience in that our loved ones are truly, 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 truly always with us and truly a part of our path as we move forward. So with that, if I speak too fast, just give me a high sign. I'll try to keep my tempo. I get very excited when I talk about this, so I can just go a mile a minute, but I'll be in that space. So the night that my ability to connect to my husband opened, or it was the night of his passing, the night that it opened up. And when I say connect to my husband, from just a few hours after he crossed, I felt him, and very similar. I know many of us have heard Elizabeth's story. So you felt Morgan come close, you felt him in your body, you felt the hug, the experience. It was a similar experience with Bruno with his passing, in that he came into my body. I could feel him sentiently. I could feel his emotions. I could physically feel him, and I could see clairvoyant experiences and hear things as well. I had never had a mediumistic experience like that before he crossed over, but I realized after he passed, I'd actually begun having precognitions and predictive dreams several months before he crossed over. The first night that he came to me, he talked about what he would like to do at his celebration of life, and he was adamant that it would be a celebration. And his visits, I called them his visits, but his visits didn't stop at that night. It was every day, multiple times a day for weeks. And then it kind of tapered into sometimes it would happen. I couldn't necessarily predict when it would happen, but when he was there, it was visceral. I was just in a trance. The experiences would last anywhere from like a second to almost an hour. Being a researcher, I documented everything meticulously. I mean, like I developed matrices to catalog the objective information that happened. So if there were physical things that happened, so for example, if the lights were flickering on and off, if there was all of a sudden a cold drop in temperature, if objects suddenly appeared, if things were knocked off shelves, if there were sounds, if I could hear things, if other people were with me in the room and what did they experience. And then of course I documented the subjective or the emotional things that happened as well. And then the implications of his visits. And as I started to it was very quickly, I started to understand not only was he not gone, he was very much still here. He wasn't just an imprint of the past. He was actively engaging with me, and I could validate this because the information that he would give me, I could verify it objectively with other information on the outside. So for example, and actually I'll drop it in the Q&A in the chat box. I don't have it up now, but I'll drop it in. I wrote an article for a magazine called Love What Matters. And he would give me, and I documented things like this there, but he would give me information or give me messages to give to other people with very specific information, things that there's no way that I would know. And I would write it down. Sometimes he would actually come into my hand and use my hand to write the messages, and it would be in his penmanship in a very specific dialect that he's from Argentina, very specific words from Argentina that, although I'm fluent in Spanish, I mean, those were words that it would be like, I don't know, like somewhere from like the Highlands of Scotland, and someone who's not a native English speaker would all of a sudden know these very articulate words from a very specific region. So I would write down the messages, I would know who they were for, and I would pass them on and they would be validated. So it was about 8 months into this happening, and I'm realizing this isn't stopping. And not only that, it was other people from the spirit world started to come to me as well. I didn't know any of them when they were physically alive, but when they would come to me, I knew exactly who they were, exactly who they were for, and I always knew their loved one in the physical world. And so I would document their messages. I could talk with them. Their messages would come through again with visions on top of hearing, on top of smelling, on top of emotional ties, and then just knowing things. They would tell me their story. So I would document this. And then now I understand the ethics of doing this, having trained in mediumship, but at the time I didn't know. And so I would reach out to the person in the physical world for whom I knew the message was intended, and they validated it every time. So about 8 months into, and again, I'm fast forwarding, leaving out many chunks around the grieving process, which of course this was embedded in, because this was not only a shock of the psychic and mediumistic side opening up, but also the shock and loss of my husband passing at 34 years old unexpectedly. And so this is really weaving in and out. In addition to that, I mean, my world has been obliterated in every way, right? My identity as a wife is now completely, has completely shifted or even like expanded in a way that I never would have envisioned. Sorry, just seeing a chat. Just wanted to make sure no one was saying I'm talking too fast. Okay, good. And then as well, I mean, he passed in during COVID. And so we were in lockdown. Bruno and I were expats living abroad, and I moved back to the US, and I was in grief for a year. And so just everything, my entire reality, my identity had just been turned upside down. I saw my first medium about 6 weeks after he passed. And I'd never seen a medium before. I didn't even know what a medium was. I thought that mediums and psychics are the same thing. Now I know that there is a difference. Mediums connect to loved ones on the other side. Psychics connect to human. A medium can also connect human to human. I had no idea. But a friend of mine suggested that I speak with a medium just because I was very vocal about these experiences happening. Not only did I document them, but I talked about them because I knew there was something here. And so a friend suggested I see a medium. I did. Terrible client. I'm the worst client, I think, for a medium. I'm like the medium nobody wants to sit with because I'm tight-lipped. I show up with a bunch of questions. And now I understand that only blocks the connection, now being a medium myself. But I was skeptical, and we're vulnerable, especially if it's the first time sitting with a medium. But I sat with a medium and they validated the exact details of my first experience with Bruno. And that was the first time that I started to say, not only perhaps is this real, this meaning connection to our loved ones on the other side, but maybe it's really real that I can connect to my husband as well. 8 months later, I went back to that same medium. And again, I went to mediums when I felt like I was ready to have some validation around my own experiences. And also I could just feel in my energy, I was ready for some sort of a shift. And there's this I have not been able to document and research, someday perhaps, but there's a physiological shift that happens when we speak with mediums. And perhaps, I imagine many of us here have also sat with mediums. We feel an energetic, just shifted. There's an upgrade. There's something that happens in that spiritual space. Our loved ones are close. There's a door that's opened. And physically, I would feel better. And that happened again when I saw the medium again. And so he said to me, Lenore, you know you have this. And I was like, what do I have? Like playing, coy, like, oh, tell me. What do you mean? What do you mean I have this? He's like, Lenore, I know that you, as of course the medium would know, so I as a medium can sense it in people as well if they have this. And he said, I know that you can talk to spirit. And I was like, oh, no. And he's like, you do, but you get to decide what you do with this. We all get to decide. And so I hung up and I sat there talking to Bruno. And again, as a researcher, I still don't even know if I believe this, but yet it's the realest thing. It's my ego that's saying, I don't know if I believe it, but every ounce of my body believes it. Plus, there had been enough validated information that I knew. And so I just asked Bruno, I said, guide me, please guide me. And he guided me to whom I would study with. I studied quite rigorously I still even dip into workshops just because I enjoyed it and I love it, but I studied very rigorously for about a year. I began seeing clients, and actually the word kind of got out, especially among other suicide loss survivors and other young widows, and among people who wanted someone who knows the mental health field. I mean, I'm a doctor of social work, I'm not a clinician, but I'm trained in mental health, and then also the scientific side. And so people like me who are quite skeptical were kind of, they were hearing from other people. And so I started getting a lot of referrals. And so I took clients for some time, but I always knew that part of taking clients would just be a part of my journey. It's similar to in social work. I knew I was never destined to be a therapist. I knew that I was destined to do something in kind of a more of a macro perspective. And I just held on to that. I had no idea what this would look like, blending mediumship. Just over a year ago, I felt things really start to shift. And I'm very sentient in my mediumship, which means I feel everything. I also see, I hear, I know things as well, claircognizantly, but my strongest sense is emotionally and physically in my body. I feel everything from spirit. And one way I know, and I've known this throughout my life, and I can recognize it in retrospect, when I start to get very physically sick, I know that I'm fighting a natural shift. And I was starting to get very physically sick. And I was like, okay, step back, something has to change. And so I put it out to spirit. I said, I'm ready for what's next. And just give it to me, give me light. I love mediumship. I want to continue doing this. But I know that there's a shift coming. Instantly, it was like within a couple of days, I had a massive download from spirit, and Bruno was there. And it was, you're going back to research. And your job in this life is to help people with their own abilities, not feel ashamed of them, not feel quote unquote, and I say this quote unquote, I said it to myself, quote unquote crazy, because we are not. There is nothing more real than this, but we feel like we're out of control. And unfortunately, that's the word oftentimes that's available to us. we're not crazy. We're not imagining it. No, this isn't just grief. This is an innate, beautiful ability that comes in so many different flavors. It's a language that we all are born with a human right to be able to access in some way. And how that manifests in us is different across the board. But I knew that my job here was to normalize, and I have goosebumps all over, normalize and validate this, and investigate it in a very rigorous qualitative and quantitative way in terms of research, and speak truth to this and bring it forward, not to convince anybody, that's not my job, but rather to bring it forth to the people to whom, A, this is happening and we want to understand what's happening in our bodies, and then B, in a grief space, in a mental health space, bring it to the practitioners who might be able to be a doorway open to us engaging in this world, be it the spirit world, be it the psychic world, be it the intuitive world, however we choose to label it, in a way that serves us in a meaningful way. So came full circle. So now, and I'm getting into the study then, and again, I'm being cognizant of time, so I see questions that I definitely want to make sure that we have time to answer them. But it came full circle, and it literally came in a download of, all right, these are the studies that you're doing. So I have 2 studies now that I'm working on, and they both go into practice as well, with practical implications working with the clinical mental health field. So I work very closely with other clinicians. My friend Jacob, who's here, who's a licensed clinical social worker, who also is in this world. There are some of us who are dipping into both the spirit world and the mental health field, and our dharma is to walk the line in both of these. And we are not so distinct to say that we're only a brain or only a spirit. Those of us who live in both worlds know that there's a dance between the two. So the 2 studies that I did, I'm working on writing up both studies now. I am a one-woman show these days, which means I do all the analysis by myself. I do all the data collection by myself, all the transcription, all the write-ups. I took for granted what it was like having very fancy data packages and assistants working for me. However, I'm applying for grants, so hopefully the research will speed up. In the meantime, this means I'm intimately connected to the data, so this is beautiful. The first study that I did, I worked with 14 widows who were clients of mine before, and I invited them to come back for a reading, and I looked longitudinally, which means over time, at how working with mediums, both myself, but other mediums, so mediumship in general, how did this affect their mental health and grief processing? And by and large, of course, there's selection biases in terms of the people who joined the study had an interest, a vested interest in it, not saying it was one way or the other, but by and large, working with mediums was one of the most, if not the most, for most of the women, the most impactful intervention that they worked with in their grief. And this was for multiple reasons. One, on one level, it gave them answers, it gave them connection, it gave them confirmation that their partner is still with them. It gave that physiological upgrade that we talked about before. But more than anything, it opened the door, especially over time, because when we first see a medium, oftentimes it's that like immediate grief respite. We just need answers, we need something. Over time, as we're working with mediums, it's not, a mediumship reading is not one last hello and definitely not one last goodbye. It's an open door and a catalyst, for an ongoing relationship with our loved ones. And that was one of the major takeaways. So that's the first study. So that one is on the weekends, over coffees on Sunday, I'm writing up. And the second one, which I'll focus on for the rest of our talk today, is the unexpected mediumship awakenings, which is bringing it full circle back to what happened with me and Bruno. So I will dive into that and give some of the findings. I'm not going to go too in depth on like the data collection and the structure and sampling, that stuff. I'm happy to talk about it in the Q&A, but the methods is a little dry. I love it, but we'll keep it contained. But what I will say, I'll go ahead and jump to who I talked to. So I interviewed 31 people for this first wave of data collection from across the world, predominantly from the United States. So 24 of the people were from the US, predominantly women, 28 women, 2 men, and 1 person who identified as non-binary. Mediumship self-identification. So the people that I interviewed, it's just from my little slice of the internet that I've carved out of the people who found me, and then also referral. So other people, clinicians, researchers in this space also referred people to me. But the people who self-identified their level of mediumship was between a professional working medium to someone in mediumship development, to someone who's not in development, but is informally read for other people, to people who have not read for anyone else and have kept their experiences to themselves. As I went through this study, it was so interesting. So it was 13 people initially were either developing, 13 of the 31 were either developing or already a medium. As we went through from data collection to then I got in touch with everyone and gave a presentation to them before the conference. And I can't remember off the top of my head, but several people had moved into development or professional since we talked. And this is a sub-finding, but it's so interesting that it was partly not that it's not all due credit to the study. Absolutely not. It's to, our own path and our own comforts and our own journey with mediumship. But there was absolutely a validation, meeting other people who've had this experience and also being told you're not the only one. And this is absolutely a part of your path, right? So that was a little sub-finding. The people whose the person who had passed that opened up their awakening. And I will say almost everyone had the awakening of their mediumship when their loved one passed over. However, like myself, some of them realized after that they'd had experiences early on in life, but they didn't have a framework for it. There was no understanding that it was mediumship, or that it was even something worth noting. It was just, life, or it was forgotten. 14 of the participants had lost a partner, 6 had lost a child, 4 had lost a parent, 4 a grandparent, 2 a sibling, and 1 a friend, as the person who opened up their awakening. And passing was from many different reasons why the person's passed. And Elizabeth, I'm happy to send the PDF of this as well to you, of the PowerPoint, in case anyone really wants to dig into the method. And I'm happy to share that with anyone as well. So participants reported receiving communications through a variety of modes. Visions, so clairvoyantly seeing either inside the mind's eye or outside. Hearing voices or other auditory communications, which is clairaudience, having telepathic conversations. And it was, I have goosebumps all over. It was so interesting to hear how people describe this. I call it like the call and respond. It feels literally like Bruno or a loved one is talking to me, and at the same time we're responding. And it's almost like I'm witnessing it in my mind. I can see this conversation happening. I'm like, this is way faster than my own brain works. And so I know it's coming from somewhere else. Intuitive knowings, or just knowing something, or downloads, emotional exchange. And then of course, this happened both waking hours and then in dreams. Communications were repeated and dynamic, so they were two-way. They were intelligent, which means I qualify this as beyond the experience's conscious thoughts, oftentimes verifiable with objective information, like what I said before with Bruno. And they happened interestingly, they happened immediately after the loved one passed, to up to 14 years in my sample was the first time the experience happened. So one of my participants, it was 14 years before she had her first experience with her loved one. All participants could communicate in some way, or at least perceive communications that could be verified from their loved one, and many could perceive and communicate with other people as well on the other side. And for many of these people, that was the latter, the multiple people, they really awakened to this after training in mediumship, if they did. Okay, so I'm just going to read as I go through this some quotes, so it's not just me talking about this. So here, and someone asked, have you seen him physically? So this quote actually speaks to that, not my experience, but one of my participants. Lily, whose brother is in spirit, said, I've seen him physically. When he came to me the first time, he was glowing all around his body. I could see I have goosebumps all over. I could see something like water droplets on his body. It was glittering. It was almost like he had just finished taking a shower or something. Then we started having this conversation. I was wide awake. I wasn't asleep or dreaming. I wasn't projecting. As Lily went on to say in our interview, and I will say interviews lasted between 1 to 1 was 4 hours. So these were very in-depth, very thick data interviews. The conversations that Lily and her brother had helped her understand, again, goosebumps all over. That's the sentience, the physical manifestation of a confirmation, right? But helped her understand his passing. He had passed by very traumatic means, and hearing his perspective and things, again, that her conscious mind, she's like, there's no way that I could have thought that. I was so in grief. I was so deeply entrenched in like guilt and survivor's guilt, these things that we feel. She's like, I didn't have a clear mind to understand his perspective. When he came to me, she's like, it just cut through everything. And with that, there was an alleviation. Sam, whose wife is in spirit, and Sam is one of the most scientific left brain people I've ever met. He's 63, laboratory manager. He says, Bolts just come out of nowhere and they resolve things for me one way or another. It's as if I'm asking my wife a question, but I'm not conscious I'm asking her. And that's what she replies to. And he gave the most amazing experiences of how his wife helps him at work, how she gives him answers. And he's like, a problem at work that I've been working for 2 years, she came to me in that bolt and I resolved it. It was for legislation and it was resolved. So that's just a little bit of kind of the, again, I'm happy to send this with other quotes, but that's just a little bit of what the experiences look like for people. But what does this mean? Again, I'm a social worker. I work in mental health. I work in direct practice. I'm working with clinicians. I want to know what is the meaning behind these experiences for ourselves. So we that are going through them have some sort of a framework to understand the bigger picture, but also to give to the grief therapists and grief supporters and the grief community to understand our perspective when we're going through these experiences. And Christina, who is an incredible medium, she's a practicing medium now. She was one of my first clients. We're very close. Her fiance is in spirit. And initially, her quote just to me just really encapsulated what the initial awakening feels like. And she says, it's chaos and it's peace. At first, our worlds are upside down in terms of the loss, in terms of our worldview is upside down for me, my identity as a professional, but that is not indefinite. With time, with opening up to our experience, with connecting to other people in our community that are open to possibly the fact that maybe the spirit world exists, with meeting other practitioners, be it a grief therapist who believes in the spirit world, be they a medium who opens the door, be it a friend, another person who also had an experience like this. It moves, I have goosebumps all over again. I'm just going to stop announcing it. We'll just assume I have goosebumps through the whole thing, through the whole talk. But this confirms for us that this is a way forward. And it's also, as we move out into a community that's beyond kind of a judgment of, oh, this is just your grief, or, oh, you're imagining it. When we start to connect to other people in our physical human incarnate community, but also we start to open up to who's on the other side, then the doors really fly open. And it's like one thing after another. We're put on a path where we meet the person we're supposed to meet. We go to the class we're supposed to go to. We meet a friend who connects us to a person that gives us this incredible information that helps us awaken in ways that we never even dreamt possible from our thinking, cognitive, analytical mind. This is so important for mental health practice and grief practice, because in traditional mental health, especially in the grief process, we're really told that at best, we'll maybe get to a place where we can coexist with pain and forever be in pain. We're told that maybe, possibly, we'll go back to who we were. We're even expected of that. And we're expected to do that in a very short time period, like 6 weeks if we get time off from work, a year. That's kind of like the threshold that society gives us. No, when we move beyond these constructs that we have in our very human physical world and the mental health field around this, we see that there is no timeline. We know this in grief. There's also no timeline, and there are no structures to this in our opening up to spirit. It really is just kind of surrendering to the process and letting the doors fly open. So I want to dig into, in the next 10 minutes or so, 7 minutes, I'm going to try to wrap it up with that. Some of the sub-themes around what is chaotic about this and then what is peaceful. And again, this happens, this shifts over time. This moves over time. This moves with more support. And it also moves really with more belief in our own selves, and that happens over time. But initially, when this opens up, when connection to our loved ones on the other side opens up, or even if there's just a curiosity about it, there's oftentimes massive uncertainty and self-doubt. So we're questioning ourselves. We're questioning oftentimes our value and our self-worth. Am I worthy of having these experiences? For myself, and several other people explain this in their interviews, much of the mediumship research that's out there is written by celebrity mediums who, I mean, they're incredible at what they do. What we don't talk about is very well-known mediums also started somewhere, right? And so there's incredible tremendous training that goes into being a professional medium. It is work. It is hard work. I know because I've been there. It's incredible work. And so part of that is learning to trust ourselves. And I would say that's really one of the biggest components of training in mediumship. And so it didn't come just, yes, there is a natural component, absolutely. Michael Jordan absolutely has an innate talent, but he also had massive training that got him to where he would be. I might be dating myself, Michael Jordan, from the 80s and 90s basketball player. I loved him as a kid. But we don't talk about that. And also for those of us who opened up to our abilities by way of connection to a loved one, especially in adulthood, we don't see our stories, because what tends to be out there is discussion of mediumship. We open up where, suddenly as a child, we're able to see spirits. And while that's certainly the case for some, that's not the case for everyone. So really this is diversifying what mediumship looks like. Moving on, there was an issue around isolation in the beginning. And again, I spoke to this before of there aren't a lot of people that understand grief, and there aren't a lot of people who understand a spiritual awakening in grief and an intuitive awakening in grief. And that's what makes it so important. Some people found that they had to hide their abilities. Jill said the secret part of this, the secret part of her ability to communicate with spirit is very hard. Just a few people know. I have very few people who I can talk to about it. It's really hard for me. I'm a very logical, responsible, normal human being, and I have things that happen to me that I can't explain. What's very cool, I know Jill quite well now, we've stayed in touch, and she is developing now in mediumship. She's opening up to this. She's talking to her family about it. So again, as we kind of allow ourselves to push through those constructs, things open up. She's so authentic in who she is now. She's an amazing human. And as she comes out as a professional medium, I know she will, she'll break through that. So again, I'll leave some of the other pieces and happy to share that, but moving then into the peace and the opening and really the awakening from connecting to our loved ones on the other side. This also was multifaceted. I think the most profound and definitely the most prolific finding in terms of how beautiful and peaceful and healing this is the way that a connection to our loved ones helps us move through grief. Sorshi, whose son passed at 12 years old, I believe he was 12, he passed by suicide. She said, and she was very early in her grief. It was around a year, I believe, when we first talked. And she said, the grief is so heavy, but it's like I'm on a different level to everyone else because I know and I knew that he's still with me. I don't think I would have survived without this. And I will say that I want to even couple that back to my other study with women who had seen a medium, but didn't necessarily identify as a medium themselves. And it's like, there's something different when we're able to allow ourselves to open up to the possibility of the spirit connection. And then when we feel it by way of our own practices, be it through an innate opening or through something which quote unquote induces it, like somatic healing, breath work, even working through traditional counseling, things like EMDR, these different ways in which we can kind of open up our spiritual connection by allowing our brain to this is getting into a way too complex side, but when we move our brain waves into a theta or in a receiving state, we are working in the same way that mediums work. And so it's opening up to a place where we can be in contact with loved ones on the other side. And having that is both a mechanism for survival, but it's a mechanism as well for allowing energetically ourselves to switch. Sheila, whose daughter, oh, I love this. Sheila, she's 6 years, so she's further in her experience. However, as we know, time is not definitive of what this means, but her daughter is on the other side. And Sheila said, my daughter showed me a vision. We're like a shoestring. You're on one end and they're on the other. Even if you tie it in a nice little bow and untie it, you're still connected. Sometimes they're close, sometimes they're a little further away. Maybe you're in a day you don't need them right there at that moment. They're definitely going to give you your space when you do need it. So they're not smothering you, but they're always observing and they're always there rooting you on. I'm grateful what I have is a relationship with my daughter on the other side. I can't imagine not having it. If I could pass on one thing to any survivor of loss, it's if you're open to it, the connection will find a way. Oh, I just want to let that land. I mean, and she's just such an incredible person. I'll move through some of the other findings just to make sure that we have time for discussion. But I do want to add a couple more things about, so what do we do with this? What do we do when we have an opening to a connection to our loved one on the other side, even if we feel like we maybe we feel them, or we see numbers on a clock that remind us of them, or we see a license plate, or we see an animal doing something wild in their behavior, and it's like, could that be? Is it? Am I imagining it? Am I quote unquote going nuts? What's happening? And I will say, as we lean into development of our abilities, that's when oftentimes for some of us, we start to A, get the validation that what we're experiencing is real. And then B, we also start to really open up our senses in ways that we never could have imagined. The caveat to that, and this is a personal kind of, I don't know, pathway, I suppose, that I want to be, that I am forging as I go forward, is what does that look like in the mediumship development world? So, and I list on my website, on my resources page, tons of places that I've studied at that you can go to just to dabble and experience, not necessarily to become a professional medium. Maybe that's your path, maybe it isn't, but really to just explore what it feels like to sit in a space with other people who are connecting to spirit. So that's on my resources. I'm happy to drop them in the chat after. It's just my drlenorematthew.com/resources. So that's all there. But we really need to update in the mediumship world. What does it look like to develop your abilities and why? How the mediumship world really is structured now is you go into training with the viewpoint, or how it's structured, to become a professional medium. And that means you're doing one-on-one readings. That means you're doing demonstrations. Maybe to a lesser extent, you're being trained to do group readings. But that is shifting as more and more of us, A, are talking openly about grief. B, more and more of us are just opening up to our sensitivities, be they mediumship, if we call it that, be it psychic, if we call it that, be it just being intuitive, perhaps being empath, whatever the word is that we identify with. We're becoming, as a society, more sensitive and aware. And it's becoming more and more accepted to talk about being sensitive, and both sensitive in our expression of our emotions, but also sensitive in terms of sensing things. And that's part of what COVID did. We just, being inside for so long, we were noticing how we were feeling. We had to. So going forward in the mediumship world, and this is something that I'm working on very closely, it's setting forth opportunities for those of us who are interested in just seeing what's out there without being trained in a very kind of rigorous, structured way. And oftentimes it's at odds anyway with grief, and that we need something trauma informed. We need something gentler. We need something that is open in terms of what does this connection mean to us. And it is out there, not saying that it doesn't exist, but I do feel we're going to be seeing a shift towards that as well. We also see, and this is something, if you're working with a grief clinician and you ever feel like you can't tell them that you're interested in this world, you feel like you can't, if you're having these experiences, you feel like you can't bring it up. I have, and I'll drop that as well in the chat. I have on one of my blogs that I wrote, just kind of like a basic intake form to tell your clinician this is happening to you. You are not imagining it. You are not quote unquote crazy. You are not the only one. And I bring this up because counselors and therapists that we have any here, obviously we would have, I mean, Jacob and I, we speak this language as well. We love this world, but you are not the only one that's having these experiences. And I'll tell you what my grief counselor told me when I was terrified to tell her what was happening, because I honestly thought she would tell me that I would have to be institutionalized. I thought that she would tell me that there was something seriously wrong with me. And I thought that she would suggest, and at this point I was a 36-year-old woman. I thought she would, I mean, this is how your mind goes when you're really, overstimulated and in fight or flight, which I absolutely was. I thought that she would contact my parents and tell my parents that I would be taken away and I would absolutely lose everything after I already had. None of that happened, but this is when we're in extreme fight or flight. And if there's anything quote unquote crazy, it's what society makes us think about our very natural abilities. So what she told me when I told my counselor, and I say this to everyone here, so please take this, use this. If you need validation, it's here. When I told her what was happening with my husband, she said, Lenore, I've been doing grief counseling for a long time, 20 plus years. I've been doing this for a long, long time. You are not the first and you are not the last to tell me that their loved one on the other side talks to them and communicates with them. And hearing like, girl, you are basic, you are normal, never felt so good. After that, it was during COVID again, so it was online. We hung up and I just sat there and cried because it was the validation that I needed in my heart to know that this was real. And that for me was a door to like, this is my experience. You are the expert in your experience. You are the expert, even though we don't always have the words to say what we're feeling. You are the expert in that experience, and never let anyone take that away from you. And if you need any sort of validation, please take that statement as yours. And then I'll drop in as well an article that I wrote. So even if you just take the words, take the verbiage, if you need that for a counselor. And then the last thing that I'll say, just kind of closing this, grief makes us feel very alone. Grief makes us feel very isolated. Opening up to the spirit world can make us feel very isolated and alone as well. And the one thing that kept me going was knowing we are never alone. And I know that we hear that, but really we never are alone. And I think when I would feel alone, even being a medium, being able to connect, there were, of course, still times when I was just in my very human experience of being a young widow and missing Bruno and just missing life in many ways to what it was before. I would go into meditation. I would just sit in meditation, or I would go for a Reiki healing, or I would go to a slow yin yoga class. And working in my human physical body, through the breath, through the body, every time it would bring me back full circle. I could settle. I would move out of this very human experience of extreme fight or flight or dissociation when I just fell out of my body. I would come back to homeostasis and remember that I'm okay, that I'm safe, that I'm in my body, that there are resources here, that I will keep going, that I have to keep going. There's a reason I'll keep going. And part of that is to speak truth in and let unfold this incredible relationship that I have with this incredible spirit world that really can only be manifested and brought to life in this experience with me here in the physical. So I guess just if there's one takeaway, know that coming back into the body again, walking in nature, breath work, and I have all this on my website as well and resources, yoga, talking to another person who has these experiences, all of these different things get us out of that spiral, bring us back, help us ground down, and allow us to continue on and move forward. So I will leave it at that for now. And I know some questions popped in.
Amazing. So there are a lot of questions, but one of the main things that people are saying is that you're so eloquent and so wonderful to listen to, but also that they would love to see the study. So if you can send that to me as well as the intake form, I think that would also be wonderful. I just want to say that last night I was at a meeting of Helping Parents Heal Cave Creek at someone's home. It was the affiliate leader's home. And I would say that of the 40 people who were there, and there were many new parents who were there as well, 6 of them are practicing mediums who are moms or dads who have become mediums since their children have passed and are certified and are now working as mediums because, and then that's just 6, but there were probably at least 15 people who have very definite interactions with their children. I think all of us do at a meeting like that, but then there are people who can't stop hearing their kids telling them to do things throughout the day and really have a relationship that's ongoing constantly. And I think that it is something that is so wonderful to hear that you're normalizing this and making it available to so many people, making people realize that there's nothing wrong with them. And to the contrary, that this is something that is going to heal them eventually and probably much more quickly than any of the traditional methods that are out there to heal from the passing of a child or of a loved one. And I also, there are questions that I want to be able to ask, and I've said a lot of stuff really quickly. You can answer anything that I said, although it wasn't really a question. But Pamela is saying, is the social work literature open to this type of research? I came across an article that described how mediums were more helpful for grieving parents than the therapy. Are some journals more open to that than others?
Good question. So Well, I'll back up and say the publishing experience, if anyone is familiar with the academic publishing experience, it takes years, sometimes at least a year usually, to get the research out. So I'm just writing now the article on the study that I presented. And so I'll let you know how open they are. However, there are journals. Yes, there are absolutely academic journals that are open to this. In terms of funding, not a ton of research. I mean, if we're looking at the NIMH, for example, they're going to be funding more, research that is more kind of, quote unquote traditional. But there's couched in the spirituality research and approach, there's absolutely more interest, I would say. And really, that's partly because the mental health world knows that we're ready for new perspectives. Mediumship is still on the fringes. And to be honest, social work in the mental health world is a bit on the fringes as well. We talk about social justice a lot in social work. So I'm kind of used to being on the fringes. I kind of like it there. It's a fun place to be, because you do get to be a bit more daring in your research. But yes, there are absolutely journals that are out there. I've been dropping in, sorry, just kind of sporadic. And Elizabeth, I'll follow up with a longer email of all of the resources that I reference. But there is the organization, or the association rather, that I presented at in Norway is the International Parapsychological Association. And that is an international consortium of mostly academic, but researchers from all over the world who study some aspect of the paranormal. For me, it's mediumship. Some are focusing on other areas. And that is a wonderful resource for finding other, academics and published work on the afterlife. But yes, there are absolutely studies. If you even look at Google Scholar, the other thing about, and this is a personal bone to pick, about journals and academic journals, oftentimes they are not open source, which means you have to pay to read them. So I have taken, knowing the publishing worlds, I did a lot of academic publishing before this opened up. I take a vantage point of, I publish things on blogs, I publish with magazines, I publish with mental health magazines and blogs as well. And part of that is it's just faster, but it's also free and it's accessible. And so while, yes, as a scholar, I absolutely will be sending to journals, but everything that I publish, I will also put an abridged free version on my website, and hopefully the journals are fine with it. I'll find a way to make it work. But the main reason is, I'm not doing this research to do research. I'm doing this research because why it opened up and the content that I'm studying saved my life. And I know it saves other people's lives. But yes, I will say there are absolutely pockets. And I will say, going back more kind of broadly in the mental health world. So Mental Health America, NAMI, especially Mental Health America, is a huge national non-for-profit mental health non-for-profit. It's one of the oldest in the country, and I work very closely with them. And so organizations and kind of research and organizations, or research and practice, it's always kind of cat and mouse of who's the first mover. But organizations are reaching out. And here in Hawaii, where I live, it's a very spiritual place, and so our local chapter is obviously looking towards spiritual practices. But the practical practice-based mental health world is absolutely taking interest. And the last thing I'll say about that as well, one of my closest colleagues is a licensed psychotherapist as well as a medium. She was aware of her mediumship from a young age. And she and I talk all the time to clinicians who are coming out in their intuitive side. And so she especially works with training. Her name's Kate Stakeholm. She works with training and opening up therapists to, how do you bring your intuitive self into a field that's told us we have to be objective? There's a shift that's happening. So I'll bring it back. And any other questions? Sorry, I could go on and on about.
There's so many questions, and it's just so fascinating because everyone is saying that this has helped them to be able to understand what's going on. Sandra's saying, thank you, really enjoyed your talk tonight, truly felt a part of a greater whole for the first time in my journey of child loss, which is really, really important. A lot of other parents are saying that they've been having these experiences with their own children, as I know that they have been, because this is something that we all experience. Let's see. I guess that April's talking about brainwave and entrainment, binaural beats work for her after EMDR failed. They cause severe dissociation. So is that something that you've studied at all, or have you been doing any work with that?
I haven't studied it, and personally, I have not used EMDR. I've used many different somatic techniques. I haven't used EMDR in a clinical setting, but I've used, so EMDR, it's a type of somatic therapy where we almost induce, well, it's on my website, and I won't go into it for time's sake, but I do have some links to it there. But it's a type of somatic therapy, and that means that it's beyond talk therapy, and we go into the subconscious and the unconscious mind to try to alleviate trauma responses by what's stored in memory and just held in the body. Very much kind of body keeps the score, Bessel van der Kolk, Peter Levine-esque work. So I have not studied EMDR myself. So if we look at like induced ADCs, or induced, which induced means brought on by a clinician or by a practitioner, induced ADCs, induced after-death communications. EMDR, as I understand, is one way in which after-death communications can be guided. And what works for one person may not work for another. Yoga, which I practice every day. I know Elizabeth is also a yoga practitioner, and I know some colleagues who they won't touch it with a 10-foot pole. It's like this to them, for whatever, it just does not work. And so what works for one person may not work for another. And that's the beauty of really opening up therapeutic work and working in the body, working in the spirit, is there are so many modalities that are being normalized in terms of using beats. So yes, like theta brainwave frequency, and all of this you can find on YouTube for free. I mean, that for me was, and still is, one of the most sound therapy, sound healing, one of the most alleviating tools. And I use it every day. I meditate every day, every morning. I start every morning with a meditation. And sometimes that looks like EFT tapping, if you're familiar with that, which is another somatic tool. Sometimes it's just listening to sound frequency. Sometimes it's speaking out loud to spirit, but some sort of a meditative practice. And then I sit for meditation as well. But yes, there are so many different ways to work in the body. And then what happens with the brain? So when we're in beta state, when we're, in regular operating mode, we're thinking about groceries, we're thinking about grief, we're thinking about, I've got to fill up the gas tank, which I have to do, all of these different things. We're in a beta brainwave state. So we're just kind of operating in a very human way. When we move into a more meditative state, which can happen by meditation, or it can be induced or brought on or helped on through somatic healing, through yoga, through meditation, through EFT tapping, and all these are on my resource page for other somatic interventions, our brain moves into a more receptive state. This is actually the state where we as mediums just flip onto. So if I sit, spirit knows, if I sit, and again, I don't do it with clients anymore, but I do readings all the time in my practice. I actually do it in my research. All of these all of these interviews, loved ones came in and I just let it happen. Like, this is not your typical research. But it's almost like spirit just knows, and I go into that state as a flip of the switch. But that's something that I learned how to really kind of work with spirit in that way. I won't say control it, because we're never in control, we're partners. But spirit knows when I'm sitting and they turn the switch on, I turn the switch on. But that's what happens when we go into a meditative state by listening, for example, to meditative music. We put our brains in the same place that a medium goes to. And it's all training and practice. And it truly is available to all of us. What it looks like on the other side, our experiences vary, because we all have a different flavor of this language of spirit, but it's available truly to all of us.
That's so beautiful and so wonderful. And I just want to say, when it's available to all of us, I want to just let everybody know that you are also bilingual, and maybe even more like trilingual. You're going to be presenting to Ana Molina's group in Spanish, so you're going to be giving this information to another group of parents who I am sure are really excited about being able to learn more. I see that Anna's on here as well. And maybe we could just unmute Anna very quickly, just to have her say hi to Dr. Lenore, if can you do that for me? Irene, let's see. We have something.
I asked her to unmute. She should be unmuted.
Okay. Wonderful.
Hi, Anna.
Can you say hi? Oh. I don't know if she's even got her screen on.
No, I don't know.
Hello?
She's not responding.
Oh, she's not responding. She might have already gotten off, unfortunately. But I'm
No, I'm here.
You're here.
Oh, there you are.
Hello.
Where am I? I can't see myself.
I see yourself. I see you. So
okay, I'm just sorry. It's just that I have my puppy here. I have a new puppy.
Oh, that's
And
very exciting.
he came inside my room and he's just going crazy all over my room.
Well, anyway, I just wanted you guys to be able to meet each other because I think that this will be fabulous for helping parents heal in Spanish and as well on Espanol. And I'm very, very excited that you're able to present this in that language. Do you also speak Norwegian or did you present in English there?
I presented in English. I speak Portuguese as well. And Paula will tell me how my Italian is when we see each other for lunch next week.
Italian. So yes, that's pretty amazing. Those are all similar but very different languages, especially Portuguese. And so anyway, this is wonderful that you're spreading the word to in so many languages to so many people. And one last question, I would love to be able to ask you because everyone's been asking where you studied. So I know it was at Arthur Findlay. Could you tell just a little bit more about how you studied and where you studied?
Yes, absolutely. So, and I listed it as well. I dropped into the chat the resources page. So I list there everywhere that I've studied. So this was all pretty much online, my studying for mediumship. So Arthur Findlay College, which is in the UK, which is a world-renowned institution for healing, for mediumship, for psychic work. I began actually with an organization or a center called Circles of Wisdom, which is outside of Boston. And that's where Bruno led me. So when I told him, what do I do with this? Bruno, like, this is wild to me. Just show me where to go. And of course, I had been reading, to normalize my experience, I'd been reading all the empirical literature that I could, including Dr. Brian Weiss, who does work on soulmates on the other side. He's a Yale-trained psychiatrist and was head of psychiatry at Mount Sinai. So his work, I'm sure many of us are familiar with him. That was something that I held as, I really held the empirical literature as gospel, especially in the beginning. Now I'm more fluid and I know that there can be, outpouring of information from many sources. But so I asked Bruno where to go, and there happened to be someone who was trained under Dr. Weiss who was presenting at that place. I had never, there was no reason. There was I've tried to replicate the Google search that Bruno sent me on. He woke me up in the middle of the night and said, here, and he led me there.
Wow.
And it turned out my first mediumship teacher, and I did not start a mediumship. I actually went to a class that was on manifesting, which I also had no idea what that was, but I was, early in grief. And I was like, that sounds like something positive. I need positivity in my life. And it turned out that my teacher for that was also a medium, trained in psychology, which I did not know. And her mediumship opened up when her loved one crossed over, who was actually a former partner who crossed. And then in that group, again, this is how spirit leads us to what we need. I met another woman who was a widow. She was not quite a bit further along. She was a couple years further along. And she gave me another nugget that I'll offer. And please take this as yours. This has been I've held it close every single day. And she told me, people are going to tell you, feel better. People are going to tell you what to do. There's going to be unsolicited advice coming at you from every which way. And she said, no matter what you do, every day, do something to raise your vibration, whatever that looks like. You don't have to try to tell yourself to feel better. It's not that. It's just without focusing on the outcome. Do something every day to raise your vibration, whether it's light a candle that you like. For me, it was making my bed every day, which is so simple, but it gave me normalcy. I bought a new comforter set. It was a tiny sliver of light and joy that every day I could look at in very early grief of like, okay, there's normalcy. My space is clean. The energy feels fresh. Something as small as that, but those little tiny nuggets add up over time, and it helps us build a foundation to find ourselves in kind of the rubble and build up. And then as we start to add in a higher vibration, that might feel, so today, whatever it looks like, I'm going to the beach, which being in Hawaii, that could happen. But it's like those little nuggets that built over time. There was no way I was going to the beach very early on, but now I'm in a place where it's like, yes, that feels great. And then in feeling the joy, that's also where I connect to Bruno and my other loved ones, because it's in that high vibration where I know they're close, where I'm open to their messages, where I can feel them.
Well, we talk about this thin space, and I think that beaches are always thin spaces, easier to get in touch with our loved ones there. But oh my goodness, this has just been wonderful. You're just such a joy to listen to, and everyone has really loved this talk. And we'll have to have you back again if we can, maybe. I know that you're so busy, but it would be wonderful. And I know you have to make space for Anna as well. But in any case, we always ask everyone to unmute and say thank you and good evening. So if people would like to unmute, then go ahead. And thank you so much for being here. I truly appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. That was great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Lenore.
Thank
Thank
you
you
very much.
This is just
Thank you.
Have a
Gracias,
wonderful evening.
gracias.
Lenore,
Gracias.
can you repeat the place you
Maravilloso.
studied in Boston?
Que tengan muy buena noche a todos.
Gracias.
Lenore, can you repeat the place you studied in Boston?
Yes, it's called Circles of Wisdom. And it's, I mean, there's like James Von Prague has given talks there, John Holland. So it's a very reputable place. It's also a metaphysical store, and it's on my resources list as well.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Nora.
everyone. Have a wonderful
Thank you.
evening.